Today, I'm going to show you how you can make your own perfume inspired by Makoto Yuki's MP3 player from Persona 3. Before we get started, I want to make something clear. I'm not really the kind of person who records every single step of the process while I'm building something. That's just not my style. At least, not for now. Even so, I hope this video, along with the presentation I prepared for you, will help you to understand the entire process so you can make one by yourself. And if you have any specific questions about this tutorial, feel free to leave them down in the comments and I will do my best to answer them. So let's start with the materials you will need for this project. For the sandpapers, I recommend using the grid sizes shown here on the screen, but they don't have to be exactly the same. Anything similar should work just fine. One of the most important things you will need is the STL files for the 3D printed parts. You can find them on my cool 3D page, and I will leave you a direct link in the description below. As for the paint, I highly recommend using a spray paint. Of course, you're free to paint parts however you like, but spray paint makes the process much easier and usually gives you a much cleaner finish. For this project, I use glossy black spray paint and metallic aluminum spray paint. For the primer, you can choose between gray or white. I also recommend using a spray version too. Now, to be honest, primer is optional. You can skip it if you want it, but I personally use it because it makes the post-processing much easier and helps hide the 3D printing layer lines. If you don't really mind seeing a few print lines on the finished piece, then you can save some time and skip this step. But personally, I definitely recommend using primer if you want the best possible finish. For the blue ribbon, I recommend getting at least 1 meter. That should be more than enough for this project. You will also need a few small key rings, the same kind you normally find on a keychain. If you already have an old keychain lying around that you don't use anymore, you can even recycle the rings from that. Now let's talk about the glue. You can use whatever adhesive you prefer, but I don't recommend using white glue or super glue. Both of them can leave visible marks that are difficult to remove. Instead, I recommend using some kind of silicone-based adhesive or a glue that cures on its own. In my case, I used a universal adhesive with a silicone-like consistency. It's a little thick and also takes some time to dry, but once it does, it holds everything together really well. Finally, one of the most important parts of this project, the 10 ml tubular glass spray bottle. This is the exact container I used to take all the measurements while designing and modeling the STL files. So if you want everything to fit exactly, I highly recommend getting the same one. Don't worry, these little spray bottles are actually pretty cheap. I will leave the purchase link down in the description as well, so don't worry. And now let's move on to optional materials. They are not required, but just like the primer, I highly recommend them if you want an even better final result. The UVDTF sticker design is included inside the zip file that comes with the STL download on my cool 3D page. Now, to protect the black and metallic paint, I recommend applying a clear coat of varnish. You have two options here, a spray clear coat or a water-based liquid varnish. Here is something important that I discovered working on this project. When I apply a spray clear coat over the metallic aluminum paint, it actually reduced the mirror-like reflective effect. The finish was still glossy, yeah, that's correct, but it lost that shiny metallic look that I wanted. So instead of that, I switched to a water-based varnish. I applied it with a brush using several light coats. In that way, the paint stayed protected without losing its reflective finish. So if preserving that metallic mirror effect is important for you, I definitely recommend using the water-based option instead. Now that we have gone over all the materials, there are a couple of things that I like to mention before we get into actual tutorial. First, if you have trouble fitting any of the printed parts together, don't force them. Simply use your sandpaper and carefully remove a little material at a time until everything fits properly. The same advice applies after painting. And one more important thing is that spray paint, primer, and varnishes all are toxic. So always wear the appropriate safety equipment and make sure you are working outdoors on a well-ventilated area. Safety is first, don't forget it. Now it's finally time to begin. As I mentioned earlier, you will find the direct link to the STL files down in the description below. There you will be able to download all 4 STL files needed to print the parts, along with the digital resources for the sticker that will be applied at the end of the project. The 3D model has already been fully tested, adjusted, and refined to make sure everything fits correctly. Honestly, getting to that point took quite a while. There were a lot of print tests, tolerance adjustments, and small design changes before I was finally happy with the result. But the good news is you don't have to go through any of that. Everything is already finished and ready for you to print it. Once you have downloaded the STL files, you can either print them by yourself if you have a 3D printer, or if you don't have one, don't worry, you can always contact a local 3D printing service. And if there isn't one in your city, don't worry, I'm sure that you can find one in your country that can print the files for you and ship them to you. Right here on the screen, you will see the general print settings that I recommend. In my case, I printed everything using white PLA filament with the settings you are seeing now on the screen. Once your parts are already printed, it's time to start the post-processing work. Make sure that you're working outdoors in a well-ventilated area, and don't forget to wear your protective equipment. A dust mask is highly recommended since you will be creating quite a bit of sanding dust. The first thing you will want to do is remove any raw edges, support marks, or small imperfections left by the printing process. Start with the coarser sandpaper, then gradually work your way up to the finer grades. The goal here isn't to remove a lot of the material. You're simply smoothing the surface little by little while preserving the shape of the printed part. One small tip that helped me a lot: if you have an old towel or a piece of cloth that you're not gonna use anymore, keep it nearby while sanding. You can use it to wipe away all the plastic dust that builds up as you work. Just make sure it's something you don't mind getting dirty, because after this project, you are not gonna be able to use it anymore. Once you have cleaned the printed parts as much as possible and the surface feel nice and smooth, it's time to apply the primer. Remember, apply like coats. Don't try to cover everything in a single pass. After each coat, let the primer dry completely before sanding again. Yes, I know, we're sanding again. The process is basically the same as before. Start with a lower grit and gradually move to finer sandpaper to polish the surface even more. Personally, I recommend applying about 2 coats of primer in total. That should be enough to hide most of the remaining print lines while giving you a much smoother surface for painting. Once the primer has fully dried, you have finished sanding, and everything feels smooth to the touch and wipe away any remaining dust. Now, this painting. Go ahead and apply the spray paint to the corresponding pieces. In my case, I apply between 3 and 4 coats of spray paint in total, but here is the important part. Every single coat should be light. If you're looking for a clean finish, the way you spray the paint is just as important as all the sanding you have already done. Instead of trying to fully cover the part in one pass, apply several light coats. You will get much better results in that way. I also recommend keeping a distance of about 10 to 15 centimeters between the spray can and the part you're gonna painting. One mistake I see people make all the time is trying to completely paint the entire piece with the very first coat. Don't do that, please. After you apply your final coat of paint, I recommend letting the part sit for at least 12 to 24 hours. It's one of those things that's worth being patient with, really. After all the work you have already put into sanding, priming, and painting, the last thing you want is to ruin the finish because you touched it too early. So let's paint here properly before moving on, okay? Now that your pieces are fully painted and completely dry, it's time to protect all that hard work. We're finally ready to apply the clear coat varnish. Like I mentioned, you have 2 different options here. From what I could tell, the spray clear coat slightly reactivates the metallic paint underneath, causing it lose that chrome-like effect. That's why I decided to try something different. Instead of that, I switched to a water-based varnish and applied it by hand using a soft brush. That solution worked so much better, at least for the chrome-like effect. So, if preserving that mirror effect is important for you, and I know is it, I definitely recommend going with a water-based varnish instead. Now, if you still decide to use a spray clear coat, remember the same rule you follow while painting. Keep a reasonable distance between the spray can and the part you're gonna paint. Apply several light coats instead of one heavy coat. Remember that. On the other hand, if you are using a water-based varnish like I did, simply apply thin, even coats with a brush. Try to move the brush in the same direction each time. That helps create a smoother finish and reduces visible brush marks. I applied 3 coats of water-based varnish to every piece that had the metallic aluminum paint. For all the black pieces, however, I used the spray clear coat without any issues. If you're using the water-based varnish, let each coat dry for about 1 hour before applying the next one. And once you have finished applying all your coats, let the parts cure for up to 48 hours. so the varnish can fully harden. Don't forget about your brush. When you're done, leave it soaking in a water for about 20 minutes, something like that. Use an old container that you don't plan or you are not gonna use anymore. After that, simply let the brush dry. Now let's move on to key rings. This part is actually pretty simple. You will only need 2 or 3 of the small rings, so if your key ring comes with more than that, you can remove the extras. I used a pair of cutting pliers to separate the rings I needed. Just be really careful about this, because when you cut them apart, they can sometimes spring off unexpectedly. So once again, don't forget your safety equipment. To open and close the rings, I used another pair of pliers, but honestly, you don't have to use the exact same tools I did. As long as you can safely install the rings, whatever method works best for you is perfectly fine. The goal here is simply to connect the holder to the MP3 Perfume cap using those small key rings to connect them. There are plenty of ways to do it. This is just the one that worked best for me. And now it's time to work on the holder itself. More specifically, it's time to install the blue strap. Take one end of the ribbon and glue it to the inside wall of the holder, just like the example you're seeing on screen. Once that is secure, take the other end of the ribbon and glue it to the opposite inner wall. That closes the loop. Just like I mentioned before, I don't recommend using white glue or super glue for this step. Both can leave visible stains or marks on the ribbon. A silicone-based adhesive, it could be maybe called silicone or hot glue, will usually give you much cleaner results. Now let's talk about one of the most important and functional parts of this entire project, the 10 ml tubular glass spray bottle. You can easily find this container on AliExpress. In my case, I bought a small pack of them. The reason I recommend using this exact bottle, or at least one that is extremely similar, is because every single measurement for the 3D model was designed around it. Now, if your spray bottle feels a little too thick when trying to insert it into the printed shell, don't panic. Remember what I mentioned at the beginning of the video, you can always sand the inside of the printed part to create a little more room. I simply wrapped a piece of sandpaper around a pencil. Yeah, that's so weird, but it's useful, and use it to carefully sand the inside of the print. It works surprisingly well, especially since the inside is too narrow to sand comfortably by hand. Of course, this step is only necessary if the fit is a little too thick. Now we are getting to the final assembly. At this point, everything is basically finished. There's just one small recommendation I have like to give you. Before inserting the spray bottle into the printed shell, you can apply a generous amount of the same adhesive you use for the blue strap, but only around the bottom of the glass bottle outside the glass bottle. This step is completely optional. I'm only mentioning it because it's something you may want to consider if you have like the bottle to be permanently secure inside the shell. In my case, I actually found it easier to insert the spray bottle first and then apply the UVDTF sticker afterward. It takes a little patience and there's a bit of trick to lining everything up properly, but by doing it in this way, you can make sure the sticker ends up perfectly centered and facing it in the right direction. I'm not really someone who records every step while working on a project, however, I did manage to take a few pictures while I was building this one, so hopefully they will help you better visualize some of the steps explained throughout this tutorial. I have also like to mention that on my Cool 3D page you will find the STL files for 2 more Persona projects, the Izanagi Sword and Junior Chemic Athena, both designed in a full scale for 3D printing. So if you're interested in Persona props, feel free to check them out as well. This is like a resume that summarizes all the entire process. I really hope this tutorial was helpful for you guys, and more importantly, I hope you enjoyed the projects just as much as I enjoyed creating it. I know this probably isn't the kind of tutorial format most people are used to watching. It's definitely a bit more explanation focused than a traditional step-by-step video, but I wanted to make sure I shared every detail that could help you to build your own. If you decide to make one, I have genuinely loved to see how it turns out. And don't forget to follow my other social media accounts if you have like to see what I'm currently working on and what is gonna be next. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.